Technically, Mora isn't a knife, it's actually a place. Mora is a small municipality just below the Arctic Circle in the country of Sweden, which became the historic knife making hub of that country. Since 1891, Mora knives of similar construction were made by several different manufacturers in that region. The Mora knife is considered throughout the world to be the best value knife ever produced. It's a knife built with decent quality and materials, sold at a very low price point. Over the last 35 years, when bushcraft became more popular as an international hobby, the Mora knife skyrocketed in popularity and attained legendary status among its users. In this video, I'll discuss how a tiny municipality in a remote corner of the planet produced the most distributed knives in the world. The ancestral history of the Mora knife is a matter of debate, even among Swedes. There is evidence of knife manufacturing in the Mora area over 1,000 years ago. Knives from a 1,000-year-old Viking burial site near Mora do bear a striking resemblance to modern Mora knives. Even though the Mora area is small and sparsely populated, it has a rich history of industry and skilled labor dating back to the 18th century. But the modern story of the Mora knife really started in 1891 when Eric Frost opened up a sled and carriage factory in the area. By 1884, Frost was producing knives, and by 1898, Frost was exporting his knives. By 1903, Frost was selling his knives in 3 different sizes. Frost was really great at marketing and took every opportunity to market his special laminated steel as being superior to other knife steels. In 1904, Frost reorganized the company and became a knife producer exclusively. He wasn't making carriages anymore or sleds. With his 10 employees, they made 19,000 knives that year. Like the Viking knives of the past, his knives had that classic Scandi grind. Frost knives also had this distinctive red-colored handle, and the idea was to stain the birch handles red so they look like mahogany wood. It became so characteristic of the knife that later handles were painted red. In 1910, Frost fired a key employee in his factory, KJ Eriksson. Eriksson teamed up with Anders Madsen and opened up his own knife factory in 1912 in the same village that Frost's factory was located. Eriksson and Madsen quickly became big competitors of Frost. In 1918, the partnership broke up. Eriksson bought the shares of the company and it became known as KJ Eriksson. The knives produced by KJ Eriksson were fundamentally exactly the same as the Frost knives, and soon KJ Eriksson's operation rivaled that of Frost's. Because they looked pretty much exactly the same and were made of the same steel, nobody outside of Sweden referred to these knives as Frost or Eriksson knives, and eventually all the knives made in that area were generically called Mora knives. In the 1930s, Eriksson expanded his product line with a knife known as the sport knife, which was later called the scout knife. These knives were extremely popular throughout Europe and were the first knives that kind of departed from that traditional Mora design. In 1976, Eriksson released the Model 510, which became the first plastic-handled Mora knife and was an instant hit with everybody, especially Americans in the United States, where it was dubbed the Wilderness Blade by Field and Stream magazine. Soon, The Model 511 hit the market with a finger guard, and that instantly became very popular. At the beginning of the 1990s, the grinding machines were removed from the Mora factories and they were made on completely automated machines. In 2006, both Frost and KJ Ericsson companies were merged into one company called Mora of Sweden. And in 2016, the company was renamed to Merakniv. Today, almost 4 million Mora knives are made per year, and they're the most widely distributed knives on the planet. Generally speaking, a Mora knife can be anything to anyone. It's simply a small knife that works good if you keep it sharp, and it's really nothing more or less than that. At first, the Mora knife was just a cheap knife that you'd throw in your glove box or backpack in case you needed a knife. It was a knife you could abuse or even lose and not worry about, but soon it became more than that. The popularity of the Mora knife outside of Scandinavia really took off in the 1980s when the famous bushcraft expert Mors Kachowski used the Mora knife to do things with a knife that were just never really done before. And he could just survive anywhere with nothing but his trusty Mora knife. When bushcraft TV shows sprung up in the early 1990s and bushcraft chat rooms and forums flooded the internet by the late 1990s, the Mora knife was the preferred tool of the trade. And by the early 2000s, I think everyone owned a Mora knife. Bushcraft started as a serious way to learn survival skills and thrive in the wilderness. It centered around cheap, simple tools, and the hobby just had no snobbery about it back then. But soon, bushcraft kind of became commercialized, and all of that kind of went out the window. Soon, people were abandoning their trusty old Moras because they were convinced that they needed a super knife that cost hundreds of dollars. They believed that if they didn't buy some semi custom knife, how would they ever survive in the wild? Well, Merakniv is a smart company and they've learned to modify their product line to meet modern demand. They kept the inexpensive traditional models like the 511 in the lineup, but also eventually added full tang knives and knives with integral sharpeners and fire starters on them. Because of the blend of tradition and modern features, the Mora knife will definitely endure well into the future. The modern product line for general use knives consists of 8 knives currently sold in the US. Of course, technically there is 9 knives, but I don't have one of the new ash handled full tang knives that cost over $200, so I didn't include that in them. These are the 8 knives commonly sold in the US in Mora's outdoor line. I'll also, when I discuss each of these models, I'll also discuss the price of each knife, but be mindful that most of these knives come in carbon steel and stainless steel variants, and the price will be different according to the type of steel used. And first, we have the classic series of Mora knives. And these are basically throwbacks to the origins of the Mora knife back when Frost and Ericsson were making these knives by hand in the early 20th century. But I bought this knife for $38 in the popular number 2 size, and the number 2 size does seem to be the most popular. And although these knives are very functional, especially as a carving knife, when people started using them hard for bushcraft things, users started suffering from what became known as Marachneve syndrome, which is when the hand slides forward of the grip when the handle's slippery and you end up cutting the tendons in your fingers. And this was actually a serious and common issue with these knives back in the day. Next, we have what used to be called the Mora craft line, which is just simple, cheap knives in the lineup. And these nowadays consist of the basic and the pro. And this one is currently $11. And sometimes you can get these on sale for less than $10. And these are basically just renamed KJ Erickson models 511 and 546 knives that came out in the 1970s. These were created, basically the 511 was created to combat Marachneve syndrome and prevent the hand from sliding forward onto the blade. Unfortunately, anytime you see a Mora knife break, or most of the time you see a Mora knife break, it's usually these cheap basic knives. Some people also on these don't like this oversized finger guard right here, so they chop part of it off and sand that down to kind of modify it to their liking. But I still think that these are the ultimate glove box or garage knives. And next, we have the Mora Companion. And these start at about $21, and you can work your way up from there. This is the stainless model. Of course, they come in carbon too. But this is basically a remake of the old Erickson Model 711. They're regular and heavy-duty versions of this knife. And you could see that the heavy-duty version of this knife has a much thicker blade than the regular duty version. You can see the difference right there. It's actually pretty substantial. And of course, this is going to be a much better slicer for maybe you're a hunter or doing a lot of food prep. And this is going to be better for more survival or bushcrafty type things. And that's what I said, the price on these start at about $20, and they might even go all the way up close to $30, depending on the steel. And if you get the HD version versus the regular version with the thinner blade. And these have a really comfortable, soft contoured handle on them, and the grip's even rubberized, so you don't have direct contact with that cold plastic. And the finger protection on this isn't as invasive as the basic Model 511 is. So this is a great handle, and I really think that out of the entire Mora lineup, I think the Companion is probably the best value in a knife. And actually, these might be the best value of any knife you can buy, possibly. But whatever you do, don't underestimate this $21 Mora Companion. If you watch the show alone, you saw that there was people that survived for months using the Mora Companion as their only knife. I think having the options of a really thin, slicey blade and a really thick, heavy-duty blade is great. And I think Mora hit a home run with the Companion line. And next, we have a knife known as the Outdoor 2000, which is the more inconspicuous item in Mora's lineup. People used to falsely believe that this knife was actually released in the year 2000 because of the name. But in reality, KJ Erickson added this to their catalog back in 1990. So this knife has been out for 35 years. And this is Mora's first attempt at a real hunting knife, or should I say a real hybrid hunting knife. In fact, the prototype of this knife was called the Trapper, and I really think Mora should have kept that name, the Trapper. It has the first soft grip of any Mora knife, and it's just a very comfortable grip that can be used in any position, even upside down, while you're gutting a deer or another animal. And this handle is just a real joy to use. and freezing cold temperatures too. This blade is Mora's first combo blade, or a combo design. And the rear half of this blade is a traditional profile with a Scandi grind on it, which is great for processing wood. But the front half of the blade is actually a flat grind with a secondary bevel that matches the rear Scandi grind. So you could sharpen the whole knife at the same angle, even though it's a combo blade. And this front flat grind is just much better for processing game and skinning animals. So this is what I'd call a true hybrid knife. And this knife was very popular with hunters and survivalists up until, a new social media generation of bushcrafters started batoning logs and chopping down trees with their knives. Unfortunately, when these knives are abused like that, the forward section of this blade right here, where it thins out, tends to crack, bend, or warp, especially when you baton logs with it. I paid $36 for this knife several years ago, so I don't know what they charge for it nowadays. It just seems like everything today is about batoning wood, so this knife kind of faded from popularity. As a side note, I also believe that the Swedish military might have used this knife for a time. And that discussion of bushcraft brings us up to the next knife, the Mora Bushcraft. And these were, you guessed it, designed to appeal to bushcrafters. These are currently $60 or more, and this was actually Mora's first expensive knife. And it was also Mora's first knife with a real finger groove on it. Hunters hate finger grooves because we constantly index the knife in different positions, and that finger groove kind of gets in the way of that. But the bushcraft crowd really didn't seem to mind the handle shape, and they really embraced this knife, and it's even extremely popular today. And this was also the first Mora knife that would reliably spark a ferro rod from the factory. It was also their first knife that was sold with a survival kit option on the sheath, which includes a ferro rod and a sharpener integral in this. And, some people really like the bushcraft combo here, and some people really thought it wasn't worth the cost of 3 Mora companion knives. In 2016, Morakniv released 3 new generation knives: the Garberg, the Kansbol, and the Eldris. And these featured a brand new handle design where they finally listened to consumers and put lanyard holes on these knives. They also added fully ambidextrous sheaths where the knives can go in either way. And let's start with the Eldris. And the Eldris looks like a Mora Kansbol with dwarfism. And I think these knives are a little bit pricey considering that you're really only getting half a knife. And I bought this for $32. And these are made to be just as strong as a regular size Mora, but with the compact sheath in this entire compact package, this could easily be carried in your pocket or comfortably worn around the neck, either through the lanyard hole on the knife or the lanyard hole in the bottom of the sheath right there. So this has a lot of carry options to it, and this really is Mora's departure from a belt knife. And to be honest with you, if you aren't processing big game or batoning wood, you really don't need a knife larger than this. And I think this is a really successful knife within its niche. And next, we have the Mora Cans Bowl. And this, of course, like the rest of the new lineup, has a modernized handle with a lanyard hole in it. And this knife, I believe, cost me $36, but they do get more expensive than this. The Cans Bowl kind of revitalized this combo blade design of the Mora 2000, and it has the exact same pros and cons that the Mora 2000 has. And this isn't a knife that you'll want to baton wood or chop down trees with, but it's a good slicer and whittler with this combination blade on it. You just have to treat it gentler than a knife like the Garberg. And lastly, we have the Mora Garberg. And this is the new flagship model in the Mora line. And it's the first Mora knife with a retail value over $100. And I paid $108 for this knife 5 years ago and this is the stainless version. But ironically, the prices actually dropped, and you could find these Garbergs right now for as low as $70 or $80. And this is marketed as Mora's survival knife. And as you can see, this is the first Mora knife with a real full tang design. And this is actually a great knife and is undoubtedly the strongest Mora knife ever made. But once again, many will argue that you can buy 4 or 5 Mora companion knives for the price of this. So value is a matter of perspective. And if you own a new Garberg or Kansbol, take a look at the new sheaths that they come with, because you can actually buy a survival kit from Morakniv, and it slides onto this holster right here, and it comes with a ferro rod and a sharpener, and it slides on these sheaths right here. But those aren't cheap. These new generation sheaths do come with the ability to add other mounting options. So this is basically the latest generation of Mora knives. The current model Mora knives come in 5 different steel grades, but we're not going to talk about laminated or boron steel because those aren't being used on their current line of outdoor knives. You're basically dealing with carbon steel blades and stainless steel blades, and of course, one upgraded stainless steel blade. Morakniv uses steel codes in parentheses after the knife model name. If there's a C in parentheses, it's a carbon steel blade. If there's an S in parentheses, it's a stainless blade. The modern carbon steel blades are made with C100 steel, which is almost the exact same thing as American 1095 steel. Pretty much all the stainless blades in Mora's lineup are made with 12C27 stainless steel, which is a really great material for the price. Then we have the Mora Garberg, which is the only knife Mora makes with 14 C28N stainless steel, which is actually an upgrade over the standard stainless steel used on other Mora knives. So these are pretty much the 3 steel grades that you're going to encounter: C100, 12C27, and 14C28N. Carbon steel and stainless steel both have pros and cons. Many people prefer stainless because they resist rust and they're very low maintenance, or a lot of people don't maintain these at all. And some people prefer carbon steel blades because they're very easy to sharpen in the field and they can spark a flint. Stainless knives won't spark a flint. Personally, since I don't really care about using a flint or throwing massive amounts of sparks with my knife, the stainless knife probably has more advantages. But being able to easily make a knife razor sharp using almost anything is a good advantage of carbon steel that just can't be ignored. But whatever you buy, Morocco has an excellent heat treat process. So both of these are going to be very strong blades, and there is really no wrong choice. Just be mindful that the carbon steel blades do require maintenance or they will rust, like this one did during a week long trip in wet weather. In Scandinavia, Swedes are really proud of their Moras, Finns are proud of their Pukos, and Norwegians are proud of their rich knife history. On this table, I have knives from Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And honestly, they pretty much all look the same to me. A Finn will probably tell you that a Puko is better than a Mora, but to my objective eyes, they really are the same damn thing. I know Finns and Norwegians get mad when you call their knives Moras, so it's best just to call these knives Scandi knives or Scandinavian knives rather than just assume that anything that looks like this is a Mora knife. You know, they do all basically have the same blades with the same grind. They pretty much have the same exact rounded handles on them, and I think they pretty much perform exactly the same. But I guess if I had to pick one just based on looks alone, this Hele knife made in Norway would probably be my favorite. Swedes are very proud of their Mora knives and will argue with the rest of the world that they're the best knife for almost anything. You know, and if you try to tell them that filleting a fish with a Scandi grind knife sucks, they'll instantly accuse you of blasphemy. So I'm going to view these knives through the objective eyes of an American hunter and outdoorsman. I'll do my best to discuss the pros and cons of Mora knives in a fair and consistent manner. So let's talk about durability first. Other than the Garberg, Mora knives have a half tang design with a rat tail embedded in the plastic handle. I've personally broken the blade on a 511 right here where the metal meets the plastic handle. And this seems to be a common spot for breakage on these knives. Having said that, these knives do seem to be stronger than other similar partial tang knives on the market. You know, and if you use the models with the thicker profile blades like the HD models, I'm sure the chance of breakage will be minimized even further. But just because the cheap Mora knives aren't really a full tang design, um, I wouldn't let that dissuade you from buying them because they're an excellent and extremely rugged knife if you use them how a knife's supposed to be used. But don't get too confident because the trap that you don't want to fall into is pretending that a partial rat tail tang knife is going to be more durable than a full tang knife. People who claim this are known as Moratards or Morarons online. But remember, costs were cut to make a Mora knife as cheap as it is. So embrace that. Next, let's talk about this awesome Scandi grind for a second. The Scandi grind is ancient technology that hasn't really been improved on because it's so good at what it does. The Scandi grind is just a woodworking marvel. It'll carve and shave wood like a dream, and it'll split wood like a mini axe. The Mora outdoor knives aren't true zero Scandi grinds like a lot of people think they are. They actually have a 27-degree Scandi grind with a 40-degree micro bevel on the end. And if you don't believe me, go to their website and look for yourself. The Mora's 27-degree edge angle on the Scandi grind allows for pretty decent slicing and some precision, but it's really no comparison to other grinds when it comes to precise slicing or skinning animals. People who claim that their Mora knife is great for slicing and skinning have obviously probably never used anything else for the task. This right here is Morakniv's original fillet knife. And as you can see, it's actually a beautiful knife. And I bought this long ago before I took a month-long trip down Mexico's Pacific coast, basically fishing and living off the sea. And just look how robust this knife looks. And it just seemed like the perfect implement for cutting into those pesky triggerfish to make ceviche. And anyone of the sea that's ever filleted triggerfish knows exactly what I mean. You know, even when this knife is super razor sharp, this is literally the worst fillet knife I've ever owned in my entire life. You know, I was a hand on a commercial fishing boat for a while, and I've used some bad knives before, but this Mora fillet knife with this Scandi grind is probably the worst thing you could possibly own to fillet fish. But Mora, you know, quickly came out with a better fillet knife, you know, probably following along with some of their competitors in Scandinavia that actually know how to make a fillet knife like Rapala. Look at this thin blade on this thing and this wonderful flat grind. This is what a slicing knife should look like, not a thick knife with a Scandi grind on it. I even tried to quarter and skin a deer one time with a Mora companion, and I'll never do that again. Trust me, people who tell you that knives with a Scandi grind are excellent slicers, well, they really don't know any better. I just won't hunt with a knife with a Scandi grind on it anymore. While it's very easy to romanticize about Mora knives and push them to their limits for cheap fun, it's important to remember that they're just tools and they're good tools at a fair price, something seemingly lost in the modern world. I keep a Mora knife under the back seat of my truck and in the center console of my Jeep. And in that role, they're probably the best damn $20 knife I could have ever spent money on. For people who enjoy LARPing in the woods, you know, hacking on trees and logs with your knife, you know, the Mora knife might be great for that too. My point is, I don't think Mora knives are really a do anything knife like a lot of other people do. They really excel at some things and are barely adequate at other things. But at the things they do excel at, they punch way above their price point. People are trying to sell $300 knives that do the exact same thing as a cheap Mora knife. Well, I hope you're enjoying Knife Month on Desert Dog Outdoors. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.